Good morning out there in Facebook land. Welcome to Bible class today. We're going to get this time to settle down a little bit. I am at 9:26. We usually start at 9:30. So we'll get there in a few minutes. Yes, we got a few extras. No, I'm not seeing them. But I kind of locked into it. You know, we looked at there was a book came out like Ezekiel. They want to compare a lot of the stuff that Ezekiel saw with these things. So.
We're going to have about 5 elders here tonight.
Good. Thank you, Gary.
I want to make sure you have enough in case I don't make it.
Appreciate it. 5 will be enough. Thanks. Joe, what are you up to? Oh, Jim Rayburn. This is Jill Casper. She's a donut lady.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My wife is the one over there, dark-haired Filipino. That's her. She was, well, all the Filipinos are Catholics, you know, Muslims. So.
Yeah, my wife is Mexican.
Oh, really? Is she? How long have you been married?
17 years, 18 years here in long time.
Hi, John. One thing you don't want to say when somebody asks you how long you've been married, you don't want to say it seems like forever. Don't want to say that.
You know from experience?
Yes. You don't want to go there.
So you have me married with my wife. We got married, everything was hers or something.
That's what I hear on my side. All righty, we're about ready to start Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, 13 through 26. Mark chapter 8, 13 through 26. 13 through 26. Comparing that with Matthew 16, 5 through 12. Let's take a look at Mark's recording of this event in history, the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. Mark 8, 13 through 26. Breaking it down a little bit here, first of all, chapter 8, 13 through 21. Jesus left them, got back into the boat, crossed to their side. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread. Seriously, right? Wasn't that your job? Right? They had forgotten to bring the bread. So they're in trouble. Yeah, I mean, stop Walmart. What are they thinking? I mean, how do they get into a boat with not bringing food? So Mark kind of already just kind of sets them up for failure, right? The disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf. Well, they thought, well, Jesus worked miracles before, right? One loaf can do it, huh? He fed 4,000, fed 5,000. One loaf can do us. So the disciples forgot to bring bread except for one loaf they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. They discussed this with one another and said, it is because we have no bread. Okay. Are the disciples a little thick in the head here?
Yeah.
As usual. What is Jesus referring to here? I mean, can you even understand how the disciples conclude that this statement about Jesus is understood to be about them? I mean, everything is about us, right? That's the way our world is. We're egocentrical. Everything revolves around our world. Jesus says something, it must be something pertinent to them. And so they think they're getting chastised. But before you read any further, what do you think Jesus is referring to? Beware of the leaven or the yeast of the Pharisee and that of Herod. What do you think he's referring to? The ideology and the teachings. which are contrary to the will of God. What happens with yeast? It rises and it expands. The whole idea is what Jesus is saying, do not let any of the yeast, the Pharisees and Herodians, come into these teachings, because it's going to infect the whole thing. They're not in line with God's will. So the disciples, aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for 5,000? How many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 12 replied. I mean, Jesus is saying, all right, you got 1 loaf of bread here. And if I was really talking about that 1 loaf of bread, why would you worry about it? Because I've done miracles before. I'm not talking about this bread. I'm not talking about your incompetency. I'm not talking about your thickness of head. I'm talking about the yeast, the unhealthy stuff that's out in the world. Do not let the impure infect the pure. And they replied correctly to the answers of Jesus. You know, one time they had 12 baskets, and when Jesus fed 4,000 with 7, they said 7, and then he said to them, do you still not understand? And then Mark just leaves it at that. Do you still not get it? What do you think? Before we look at Matthew, do you think the Pharisees, do you think the disciples got it when Jesus asked this question? Do you understand what I'm talking about? Do you think that they figured it out, or you think that they're still lost? Still lost. This is kind of interesting. So how Mark describes the disciples in his gospel is he describes us as bumbling idiots most of the time. He really does. Let me ask you this question. Is Mark one of the 12? I heard yes, I heard no. What's the answer? Who gets the star? Who gets the star? Janet! Was Mark one of the 12? No. The answer is no. He was not one of the 12. Who was Mark? Where does Mark show up in the Gospels? He shows up when Jesus is being arrested, and the guards see this individual, and they grab his clothing, and he runs away naked. That's Mark. Mark is not one of the disciples. So you kind of wonder, if Mark was one of the disciples, would he have pictured the disciples in a more positive way? Probably. But how does this help you as a believer? That you look at these disciples, and the way that Mark portrays these disciples as bumbling idiots, what does that how does this give you any peace at all?
I have a question. There were apostles, and then there were disciples.
Disciples first, then apostles. Yeah. The disciples are followers. I remember my dad in confirmation class making this very clear. Some things stick in your head when you're 12 years old. That was one of the things. Apostles. What's an apostle, my dad said in confirmation class? Let's look at that word, P-O-S-T. What institution in the world has P-O-S-T? Post office. Post office. And the word A before the post means away. So apostles mean they are sent away. So the disciples become apostles. When Jesus is ascended into heaven, he says, now you go out. And now they're apostles. But at this time, they're disciples, they're followers.
Do you know what an epistle is?
An epistle, yeah, it's a letter.
No, it's the wife of an apostle.
Oh, jeez. Craig said an epistle is the wife of the apostle, so if you didn't hear that back there. So you've got these disciples, and they're following Jesus, and Mark portrays them that they're just kind of thick in the head. What does that do for you as a reader, as a believer?
Makes me feel good. Yeah.
Yeah, it sets the bar real low, right? It's kind of comforting to realize that God works with people like this. And that not only he works He works through them. He works through them. Yeah. You know, one of those things I think we struggle with as Christian believers is, oh, I'm not smart enough to do this, or I'm not capable enough to do this. And Mark, basically the way he portrays the disciples is saying to you, yeah, you are. Look what Jesus could do with these guys. Jesus can do the same with you. Don't ever think incompetency prevents you from being a disciple of Jesus. Hear that a lot, right, in the ministry when you go as a pastor and ask, oh, I don't feel like I can do that. You know, and that's where you have to sit down and say, I need to pray about it. That's the answer that the pastor really wants to hear. When you don't want to say yes, you need to say, I need to pray about it. When a pastor comes and asks you, I'm already setting this up for my success here.
Just say yeah.
Just save the time, Jill says. Just say yes. She knows. When the pastor comes and asks you about doing something, and you want to say pray on it, but why should you not immediately tell a pastor no? When he says, hey, can I have you?
Because pastor might be moved to ask you to do that.
Who moves the pastor?
The Spirit.
So you want to make sure that the spirit that's driving the pastor to ask the question is the Spirit, because you've called him to be your leader, your spiritual leader. And if a pastor comes to you, he's already kind of thinking that this person is gifted, this person has the skills, even though the person says, I'm not gifted, I don't have the skills. But I think the person needs to stand back and say, you know what? If God is speaking through my pastor, I got to pray about it, make sure that, yeah, that's true. And if God is speaking through the pastor to ask you this, what should the answer be?
I'll pray.
No. If you confirm after your prayer and you say, yes, God is speaking through my pastor to me about this, your answer is going to be yes. 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 So I love the way that Mark portrays these disciples, and it gives us a little hope for ourselves that the bar is low and that God can work through the most insignificant people of society to get his word out. He didn't work through the most intelligent, because if he did, he would have gone to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all the educated people. But he works through uneducated fishermen. The one that might have the most education, in my opinion, might have been Matthew, the tax collector. But other than that, they were just common ordinary folks. And Jesus sent them on a major mission after he ascended into heaven. He worked through their incompetencies, and the kingdom of God was glorified and expanded through their witness and testimony. So this is what's really interesting is Mark says he leaves you as the reader not sure if the disciples get it. Let's see what Matthew does. Does Matthew, make the disciples look a little bit better? Go to Matthew chapter 16, 5 through 12. Does Matthew kind of put them in a better light? He explains them he explains them, but he did the same thing in Mark. And in Mark, Jesus says, do you get it? And then the question is not answered. But does Matthew answer the question? Verse 12. They got it. Then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, this is kind of an interesting contrast between Matthew and Mark. Because in Matthew, he kind of says the disciples aren't so stupid. But in Mark, kind of not as intelligent. It's an interesting comparison and contrast that we see between the way Matthew and Mark record the same event. Let's go now to Mark chapter 8, 27 through 30. The confession of Christ. Matthew, Mark, and Luke record this confession of Jesus. John does not. Again, we're just dealing with synoptics. In Mark chapter 8, 27, Jesus and his disciples went on to villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, who do people say I am? They replied, some say John the Baptist, Others say Elijah, still others one of the prophets. But what about you? He asked, who do you say I am? Peter answered, you are the Christ. Jesus warned them to tell no one or anyone about him. Let's look at the way Matthew records this event in Matthew 16. Matthew 16, verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, do Matthew and Mark agree in the location?
Yes.
Yes. He asked the disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. So here you got Matthew actually listing one of the prophets. But what about you? He asked, who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. Now let's look at Luke's recording of this narrative in Luke chapter 9. Chapter 9, verse 18. Once when Jesus was praying in private, his disciples were with him. He asked, who do the crowd say I am? Luke does not record the location. They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life. So Matthew's the only one that records Jeremiah. But what about you? He asked, who do you say I am? Peter answered, the Christ of God. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. And he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law. And he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. So how does Peter know that Jesus is the Christ? Did he come to this by natural knowledge? No. It took a while, but who was the one that really showed him that Jesus is the Christ? The Holy Spirit. But Jesus says here it's the Father. The Father revealed this to you, that I am the Christ. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. What does this have to say about how people come to know Jesus? Can you come to know Jesus apart from the Bible? Can you come to know Jesus apart from the event? Can we come to know Jesus just by looking at creation?
Yes.
We come to know God exists by creation, but I don't know if we can know that Jesus exists by creation. It's the Word. It's the only way. Yeah. The Spirit works through the Word to reveal us that Jesus is the Christ. Even our conscience can tell us there's a God. There's something out there that floats around, but it's not really identified as the God of Jesus Christ except through the Word. John?
Well, I guess a couple of things. One thing, a pastor that I knew in the past was a missionary in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that he was a missionary to were, I guess, of the Islamic or Muslim faith.
Mm-hmm.
And when he asked the chief about God and who he was, he said that, yeah, there is a God and he had a son that was on earth, but we killed him and he's mad at us. And, in as far as my understanding with the pastor in that discussion, it was like they didn't know about Jesus Christ, or maybe, it was just vague to them. And then the other thing is that the idea of free will.
Oh, no. Don't go there, John.
This was a discussion that was on a talk show, more of a, I guess, a comedy talk show or whatever. But they were talking about free will and choice, and that they are the same. And I don't think they are.
Yeah. Let's just deal with the one you brought up about this story that is found in universal in the world about God having a son and that the son being killed. That's not wrong. That, I mean, I've read those situations and stories, and then missionaries come and say, "Oh, that's the God, that's the Son." You explained it. So again, the word's revealing. But what happened? You know, if you look at Acts chapter 2, verse 5. Acts chapter 2, verse 5. Was there any nation not represented on the day of Pentecost? How do you determine that there was not any nation not represented? What word tells you?
Under heaven.
Every nation under heaven was there. And so what goes on? Every nation is there. They go away, the apostolic sending away, they go into the world and they share the story. What happens to the stories if you constantly pass it on? It gets changed, and that's what happens. That's what happens. They didn't get the story finished. They didn't get it right. Think of an example in Genesis chapter 3 where somebody didn't get the story right. Genesis 3, Craig, not Acts. I mean, Genesis 3. Who didn't get the story right? Eve. And Adam did not. But because what did Eve add to the statement that God gave Adam? God told Adam, "You shall not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The day you eat of it, you shall surely die." What did Eve add to the story that wasn't there? No touching. No touching. Jewish legend has this interesting story. Most people understand that the curse of the snake was to slither down on the ground, but before that, he was able to stand upright. So the devil used the extra addition against Eve. When the devil got Eve to say, "You shall not eat of it, and neither shall you touch it, you shall surely die," Jewish legend says the snake, which is a standing upright serpent, pushes Eve against the tree, forcing her to touch the tree, and then says to her, what? "You shall surely not die." And therefore, Eve begins to question the threat. "I didn't die touching it, so I guess I ain't going to die eating it." Jewish legend has that interesting addition to that story. That we know in the narrative, Eve does have the story, "You shall not touch it." But Jewish legend explains how that addition actually worked against Eve. So that's what happens with these stories. When it gets passed down, you got to watch that leaven, that it doesn't get filled with wrong, full narrative accounts. And then you have to have missionaries come back and clean up the story again. So I want to just kind of deal with that, but the free will and the other one, we'll have to deal with that another time. That's another, you want to deal with that, come to my C.S. Lewis class on Saturdays. We'll deal with that there. In Ark 16, back to these narratives now, on the confession of Jesus, only the Father reveals Jesus to be the Son of God, the Christ. But I got the question, who or what is the rock upon which Christ built his church? All righty. I'm hearing different answers here. Oh, I got Peter's statement. Does anybody in the Lutheran church body here wants to stand up and say, "Built it upon Peter"?
No.
Oh, yeah, you don't want to do that in Lutheran church. Now, anybody, the cornerstone of the church, Paul says, is Christ. You know, and he says in the metaphor, the apostles are foundations, but the cornerstone is Jesus. So it's always been Jesus. So what is this rock? Interesting thing, if you really look at the Greek, if you know foreign language, if you deal with foreign language, you know that languages have genders. And unfortunately, in English, you don't get that gender thing. You know, in German and Spanish and various other languages, every noun is a gender. It's either female or masculine. So the rock here in Greek language and Hebrew, the same thing. The rock is the feminine form for rock. So could a feminine form refer to a masculine person? No. If he was going to be referring to a masculine person, he would have used the masculine form for rock. Jesus did not. He uses the feminine form for rock. So he's not referring to the person of Peter. But in the Roman church, they kind of believe that Jesus is referring to Peter as the rock. And this is the verse which they use as the foundation for what office? The papacy. The papacy. This is the verse they use to build the papacy on, that Peter is the rock of the church. But when you break it down and you look at the word, it cannot be Peter because Peter's masculine and this word is feminine. So we go to what we're hearing is it's the statement, the confession that Peter makes. What is the confession that the church is built upon? Come on, everyone should know that one. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is the Christ. That's the confession. So if you go to churches and you don't hear that confession in that church, you might want to raise your eyebrow and say, is this really a Christian church if I'm not hearing this confession that Jesus is the Son of God? And there are people and organizations out there that call themselves Christians, yet will not make that confession. They don't build their church on this foundation, contrary to what Jesus says, what a true church is built upon. Jesus is the Christ. He is the Son of God. That's the foundation of the Christian faith. That's the rock on which Jesus builds his church. So the other thing that, any questions or statements?
So, does that kind of go along with the lines of the church is the bride?
The church is the bride? Well, there's different metaphors, but you can look into Ephesians, and that metaphor is there used, that the church is the bride of Christ. Well, you go ahead and work with this glance. You bring up the word church, and the church is ecclesia. Guess what gender that is? It's feminine. Feminine. Yeah. John?
On what he says there, he said, on this I will build the church, on this rock.
On this rock.
But he's talking
Petra.
about the confession.
Yes. Of Peter, not the person. Yes.
And see, when you were talking about words having meaning, Peter or Petra means rock.
And Petre is feminine. Petra is the masculine, Petre is the feminine. And the word is Petre here, not Petra. Petre. Anything else? Before I give you a little bit of insight, which is another one that maybe turns on some light bulbs today. Take a look at an insightful verb test in Matthew. Go back to Matthew's version, Matthew 16, verses 13 through 20. And I want you to look specifically at verse 19. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, so the Roman church may say, fine, you may argue that the rock is feminine, but who does he give the keys to? He gives it to Peter because the word you is singular, not plural. But does he end up actually giving those keys eventually to the other disciples? Mm-hmm. After the resurrection? He breathes on all of them. It says, now you all have the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Think about that with the office of the keys in the Lutheran Church. That's why we call it the office of the keys. How many people are authorized to publicly announce the forgiveness of sins in the church? Publicly. How many people are authorized to publicly say, I forgive your sins in the name of the Father and the Holy Spirit? Only the pastor. There you got your gold star. She's been looking for a gold star today. Can you privately, as an individual, say, God forgives you your sins? Yes, yes, yes. For the sake of order, you have one person called, to do those means of grace, to take care of the sacraments, and to offer that forgiveness and absolution to the hearer in the church body. So you've got one called among you. So the apostles receive this gift. Every Christian really receives this gift, but in public office of the keys, you give that public proclamation only one person, the pastor. This statement, therefore, is not just reserved for Peter and not just in the hands of the Pope, but it is in the hands of every believing Christian to forgive the sins of penitent believers, but only the called pastors in public setting. That's just for the sake of order. But do you notice any footnotes after the word bind on earth will be bound in heaven? Do you have footnotes in your Bible there? What do your footnotes say about that?
Since we have been loosed.
Will have been loosed. Have been. So what comes first?
Mine
Does
says not authority to determine, but now it's still for him.
not authority to, okay. But I'm looking at the verb tense, and Jim got here the verb tense in his thing. Have been. Will have been forgiven. In other words, who forgives sins first, the pastor or God? God does. So when the pastor is announcing forgiveness of sins, is he announcing an historical act? Yes. Already been done. Already been done. I do not forgive sins on my authority. I am just the mouthpiece of God. Your sins have been forgiven in heaven before I even tell you they're forgiven. That's an interesting verb tense here. They have been forgiven. And if I withhold sins, it's because in heaven they have been withheld. I'm just following. I do not have my own authority to willy-nilly offer forgiveness of sins or to keep people in their sins. I don't willy-nilly have that authority. It is something that God has already ordained in heaven for me then to announce to the people in public assembly. John?
Well, that goes along with all of the teaching of Martin Luther's concept of the Word of God. And I think that that was the big, I guess, corner turn for him, because everything in the Roman Church, Catholic Church, is an act. And, you know, well, it's like an act of contrition. We say the same words, but it's in response to God's word, and it's not an act or a work of our own, with that idea that everything has already been forgiven.
Yes.
And I guess that that was like the turning point for me, is after I learned or heard the way that Luther interpreted the Bible, I thought, well, this guy's got it right. That's exactly what it says right there.
Yeah.
And the works, I mean, it's just.
Yeah. Well, there's controversy going on. When you mention that word interpretation, there's struggles. I'm dealing with, I teach this class in Concordia St. Paul online, and I am getting really frustrated right now. They're testing my patience because their answers are supposed to be strong opinions, but yet backed up and supported. And up in Minnesota right now, some of my students are equating BLM with Jesus Christ. Yeah, and they're making Dante Wright and George Floyd as Jesus Christ. And I have to just say, wait a minute, you can't do that. And I had to be nice and speak to them in a way. And I was surprised. I had like 3 or 4 students out of the 40 come back and just rant and rave about my responses and just said, wow, what an insightful thing. Thank you for opening our eyes to see this.
Well, you don't know about Minnesota. Well, that's your own Minnesota.
Yeah, I know about Minnesota. I was raised there.
Yeah.
So, plus I went to college there, and my cousin lives in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. So the response I gave to the George Floyd and Dante Wright comparison was, and we're not going to do that because a couple things are different. They said that Dante Wright and George Floyd were murdered and convicted. And I said, no, they weren't convicted, right? In order for you to be convicted, you got to go to, they couldn't go to trial, they're dead. So I countered that word. You're not going to be able to pass the word conviction on me and get credit for that. I mean, I challenge the students to stay away from emotional thought and just deal logical. You know, let's think about this logical. If we would just get rid of our emotions, maybe we could get some idea of unity and agreement here. Get the emotions out of this. So I take that conviction out and I said, no, they were never convicted. And then they want to say that they were murdered. And I'm saying, if you're going to do anything with the word murdered, there was no premeditation murder in George Floyd and in Dante Wright. Did the police officers premeditated think about killing these people? No. Did the chief priest premeditate the murder of Christ? Yes. They're two different things, people.
Not to mention that they're also relying on random selection of media to show the world this one isolated event that has happened thousands of other times to other people, but fail to actually reach the public.
Yes.
So it's not unique.
Right. Right. So that's where I countered both of them, those arguments. I said, no, we're not going to equate that, their loss of life at the same level Jesus lost his. And I also said a couple other things that were different between Dante Wright and George Floyd and Jesus Christ. Did Jesus Christ run away from the authorities?
No.
He did not. Did Jesus Christ respect authority, even in the face of death, even in the face of injustice? Yes, he did. Did Jesus actively resist authority?
No.
Don't compare these people.
Ask them when they're going to come back because they're overdue.
Yeah. They're going to be raised from the dead. You know what? Where is the good biblical phrase in which tells you that Jesus did not resist authority? What did the disciples want to do in the Garden of Gethsemane? Fight, raise swords, and Jesus says, "Put your sword away." You know, I am walking to the cross. This is the way it's going. You know, don't compare these people with the life and death of Jesus Christ. That's apples and oranges. And like I said, I got 4 or 5 of the students just kind of, hey, amen, professor. You preach it, professor. You preach it. So I didn't get any students saying, oh, no, you're really wrong, because they can if they want, because I'm not going to dock them because they can respond to me. But I'm hopefully what I'm doing, and my faculty advisor just Monday, he said, we're really appreciating what you guys are doing because you're pastoral. You're just not teaching them, but I'm really getting the idea that you're pastorally counseling them. And we're really appreciating that approach that you're using with your students. So I'm not the only one that teaches these classes. There's other pastors that do. But he did make notice that we are doing this universally. He thinks that's a good thing because we are promoting Jesus in a way which causes them to think about it, because there's a number of unbelievers in these classes. Yeah, number of unbelievers. Makes them think, yeah.
The most significant point is that Jesus Christ was the Lamb of God, and pure and holy.
Yeah.
And you really can't say any one human being walking on this earth today, unless there's something that just happened I don't know about, that could actually fill that slot.
Right, right.
So, yeah, that's sort of negative, the whole
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But what is taking over?
What I believe they're doing though is by elevating those two people to that level, they bring down the level of Christ.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a communist organization, so they're secularizing everything. They're trying to get the church out.
Yeah, and that's the concern, is I'm trying to protect the dignity of Jesus here. And I'm not going to let my Savior be equated with that kind of situation. Not going to do it. And I'm going to stand up for Jesus. And I just have to. I mean, as a professor, I could probably just stand down and not say anything. Being the teacher in a class that's supposed to not. But no, this is now, I'm no longer a teacher here, but I become what? I become a witness. Yeah. John?
I just have this question, and that is, if the government says to Christian churches, unless you allow the LGBTQ, whatever, people in your church and allow them positions of authority and that sort of thing, that you're gonna have to start applying for, application to assemble. What will be the church's stance on that?
The church has to be careful when they walk this line. And right now, in Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, we are pretty solid. Because of our separation of church and state, which is in, the court, it's not in the Constitution. That phrase is not in the Constitution. It's only in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to some Baptist pastor years ago, and has been implemented by the Supreme Court to deal with this. But we, as a church body, have got our lines so well defined that the separation of church and state clause, which the courts have used, it'd be very hard. There's been 3 or 4 cases in the Missouri Synod in these court cases up in Michigan and other places, and every time that court has failed because our lines are strong. But if you're going to be kind of wishy-washy about that and some allow it to be here and then not allow it to be there, that's when you get in trouble. You got to universally, blanketly say, we don't allow it anywhere.
Well, the only reason I asked the question is because in the Lutheran Synod, we've got the American Lutheran Synod, they're already there.
Right. Yeah. That's what they're going to issue. There's guys in other church bodies. Some of the churches are no longer doing weddings. Why are some of these pastors no longer saying, we're not doing weddings in this church anymore? They don't have to fight it. But you see, in our situation with our church body, how we've got it written up, again, we draw the line strong, that if you have to be a member in this church in order to get married here. At least one of the 2 parties has to be a member in this church to get married here. And if you join this church in order to get married, what do you have to agree to? You got to agree to the teachings of the church. So don't come and tell me that you're all of a sudden going to disagree with the teachings of the church when you said you agree. So this confession and this official joining of the church protects us. It protects us. Yeah. I think we got time to talk a little bit about Peter here, and that's where we're going to go in Mark chapter 8, 31 through 37. How does Peter go from hero to zero? Mark 8, 31 through 37. How does Peter go from hero to zero?
Jesus tells him he's going to die, and Peter says, no, you're not.
Yeah, let's just take a look at these verses. Craig's on it. Jesus began to teach him, the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly. I like that. Matthew wants to know that there's no confusion here. This is very clearly spoken to them. So Peter began to take him aside and rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan, he said, you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Why does Peter have a problem with this? Peter's got a problem with a lot of stuff. He's got a major problem with this one.
Again, it's man's way, concept, earth, terrestrial.
So when Peter's thinking that he's the Christ, the Son of God, what is Peter thinking his mission is going to be?
On earth.
And how's his mission going to end in Peter? In victory. Yeah, victory. And Jesus is talking about defeat because he's mentioning the word death. This don't rhyme for Peter. First of all, you made the right confession, but you don't got the right understanding. He goes from hero with the right confession to zero because he's all messed up with the right understanding. It's not the way it is. Oh man, Green Acres. I love that show. I love that show. Farm living is the life for me. Darling, I love you, but give my penthouse view. You're going to have me singing that song. All right, so Peter goes from hero to zero, but what is really fascinating is this, that how does the devil work? The devil twists words, but he also works through your closest friends. Because when you look at among the disciples, who is probably the closest friend Jesus has among the 12? Peter. That's scary, isn't it? That your trusted friend can actually work against you.
Really, your own love and admiration for that person too.
Yeah.
I have to say, Peter's heart was in the right place.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you think that they're speaking out of compassion and concern because you have that rapport in their relationship. But you can, like just when the pastor asks you to do it, sometimes you have to take it all to prayer and take it with a grain of salt and consider the source as well to see just exactly who is saying this. When a pastor's offered a call, he's got to make a decision. If this is the voice of God, then I have to take the call. I can't say no. But is this working in a way in which is not according to God's will? It's tough when you have your closest friend that sometimes can work against you. And do you think Jesus kind of is upset and disappointed with Peter? What was he expecting from Peter at this time? Support. He didn't get it. He didn't get it. He didn't get it from his closest friend. Of all things, he got was lack of support. He basically told Jesus he was wrong. Jesus didn't need to hear that right now. He needed people to affirm that his mission of death was going to be supported by his friends. When it comes down to it, did those 12 disciples support the ministry of Jesus? Well, they all ran away, except for one. Trivia question. Which was the only one that didn't run away? Well, Judas, he did more than run away. John stayed at the cross. John stayed at the cross. Yeah. Anything else to add on these? Why is the disciples told to keep quiet about the confession that Jesus is the Christ? People would get the wrong message just like Peter did. Peter didn't get it right. So if you get everybody out saying it, they're all going to get this wrong idea, and even his closest friends don't have it right.
And then it might cause a revolution.
Yeah, it caused more problem than really what Jesus wanted to handle.
Hadn't it already started as a revolution?
Not yet, but it was, seeds were being planted. Yeah, yeah. So what's the difference between a cross and worldly suffering? What crosses do believers experience, unbelievers don't?
We experience our sin, shame and the guilt.
Well, unbelievers, do they experience the punishment of sin? Sure, they die. They. So when we talk about a cross versus worldly suffering, Jesus says, pick up your cross. What does that really mean? Persecuting for beliefs. That's what a cross is. Persecution for beliefs. Persecution for beliefs. I had one discussion up in Indiana years and years ago about an elderly couple that, they were living together for companionship. Both their spouses had died. One of the woman had a husband that had died, and the living man was having this arrangement, and they weren't going to get married. Could you know why? What happens when they lose? What did I hear? They lose their pension. They lose their pension. If the wife would marry this man, she would lose her deceased husband's pension benefits. So it would have been a financial burden for them to get married. What does Jesus say? If you're going to be a Christian, be a Christian. pick up the cross. And that's what I wrote in a letter to them. I said, sometimes life isn't easy for the Christian. If we're going to make our confession of Christianity, maybe the cross Christ is asking you to bear is to lose the pension.
We have to go back to the Garden of Eden. Why did Adam and Eve have to suffer so much? Because of their unbelief and no trust.
Yeah, belief, no trust, and that God will take care of you. You lose the pension, but this is the cross you got to bear. Sometimes the cross is just not a physical; it can be a financial cross. To do the right thing. To do the right thing. Yeah. All right, we'll close at that time. So thanks for all your attention. Next week we got the new member welcome breakfast. So you get more than just donuts next Sunday. Yeah, more than more donuts. Yeah, let's close with prayer. Father, Lord, we ask for your blessings as we study your word and see that, O Lord, the path of Jesus was not easy, neither is the path of his disciples, which is our path. Help us, O Lord, always to be willing to pick up our cross because of what our belief in Jesus leads us to do and to say. We ask, O Lord, that you would enable us to make witness and testimony and to proclaim, O Lord, the dignity of Jesus Christ to the world, of just his wonderful acts of atonement done for us on the cross and given us victory through his resurrection. It is his name we pray. Amen. Thanks for joining us.
So, Pastor, have you ever heard of Adam and Eve?
Yeah.
Forgive me, I
See you next week. Lord willing, you